An area that's famous for its chalk grasslands, which are really beautiful. That's Ivinghoe Beacon, and also its wonderful beech woodlands. So, map of the Chilterns, the dark line round the edge is the natural geological area of the hills. The shaded bit is just the area of outstanding natural beauty. This, of course, is not a remote area. It's about 30 miles from the middle of the Chilterns well into London. It's quite a short journey. The hills themselves are surrounded by substantial towns as well. If you look at that, starting at the north, you've got Letchworth, going round in clockwise, you've got Stevenage, Welwyn, St Albans, Watford, High Wycombe right in the middle, sort of, Reading, and then going around the other side, Aylesbury, and then Dunstable in a natural gap in the hills. So this is a very well populated area, actually. And if you drive into the hills, you find they're crisscrossed with little windy lanes, villages, hamlets. So this area has been well inhabited for many centuries, in fact, for thousands of years, actually. And the wonderful flora that it has built up under the influence of man's activity, actually. So this is no wilderness. This is near home. The shape of the hills, well, there's a plateau on the top. Then the northwest facing side is a pretty steep scarp slope. But then down to the southeast towards London, it's a very gradual slope, which is referred to as the dip slope. So gentle slope from the southeast, plateau on top, and then a fairly steep slope on the other side. Right. The soil. Let's have a look at the soils. Right, you all know that these are chalk hills, but if you didn't, there's the Whipsnade Lion and the very white-looking fields below, showing the chalk very near the surface. If you're in a wood, it's more difficult because of all the leaf mould. But here we've got a path and a badger gets set right beside, and you can see that is neat chalk coming out from only just below the surface. So they're chalk hills. But not everybody does know that the hills are covered with clay with flints, because at the end of the last ice age, when the glaciers melted, they just dropped everything that the ice was carrying on top of the chalk hills. So clay with flints mainly, but there are deposits of sand and gravels as well all over the hills. So the plateau is pretty well covered with clay with flints, quite deep in some areas. You get to the chalk down in the valleys, and it's very well shown, displayed on the scarp slopes. So clay with flints, there we are, is quite difficult, is quite different. You can see the reddy brown colour of the clay, and those lumps are rounded lumps of flint. They're not chalk. And the properties of these soils are completely different. So chalk is alkaline, it's very porous, rainwater runs straight through it. So chalky soils are very dry, they're very drought prone, and also the rainwater dissolves the minerals and they leach out as well. So it's rather mineral poor. Now, on the other hand, clay with flints is acidic and it holds the water because of the clay. So the soils on top of the plateau and on the dip slope are generally neutral to slightly acid. You find the chalk when you go down into a valley or when you go onto that northwest slope. So it's a brilliant area for learning botany, actually, because you can go from one soil type to the next in one step, and the flora changes dramatically because you have a completely different group of plants growing on those two different soil types. But I should perhaps say too that most of our very, very common plants, the ones we see all around every day, will grow either on chalk or clay with flints. So you get all of that flora, the common well-known flora, plus all the special Chiltern ones. So we're going to go into the woods now. And this, first of all, these are clay with flints woods up on the plateau, probably. Beautiful bluebell woods. I mean, this part of England has wonderful bluebell woods anyway, and they're beautiful ones on the Chilterns. So this is an ancient woodland indicator, and the flowers the flowers that I'm going to show you are all ones that grow in long established ancient woods. So you won't see them, well, you might see bluebells in the back garden, but let's move on. This picture, a lovely patch of wood sorrel, oxalis. One of my favourite plants, that's just why I chose that one. Lovely shamrock-like leaves, violet veins on the petals.
John, can you please mute yourself, John Eccles, please? Thank you.
I'll go and get my wife.
Yeah, carry on.
Right. Bluebells are actually quite invasive. I took this picture a few years ago, and I'm sure if I went back to that site now, there would be more bluebells, and they might be smothering rather the wood sorrel. But anyway, go on. Wood anemones, another ancient woodland indicator, in the buttercup family actually, and I regard that as the buttercup's ballerina cousin. It's a beautiful plant with probably pink on the back of the petals. Lots of violets. This picture is the common dog violet. There are loads of those, but also early dog violets, which are earlier, look pretty similar. I mean, you have to know the differences to tell them apart. The early ones do grow on the clay with flint soil as well as the common dog violet, but early dog violets actually prefer the chalk. They are calcicoles. That's plants that like to grow on chalky or limestone soil. Calcareous, sorry, words go sometimes. Wood speedwell, not everyone knows this one. There is a lot of it in the Chilterns. That actually prefers neutral to slightly acid soils. Very much like, I've put a picture on the other side of one's Germander speedwell. Germander speedwell grows in grassland as well as woods, but I've seen the two growing in a patch together. If they're not in flower, you can tell them apart, because if you look at the bottom left of that wood speedwell picture on the left, the bottom left-hand corner, you've got a leaf which shows clearly that it's got a short stalk. And the Germander speedwell leaves are sessile, they've got no stalk at all, they're sitting right on the stem. The flowers of the wood speedwell are smaller, obviously. And the other thing is that the stems of both are hairy, but the wood speedwell has hairs all the way round, whereas if you find a Germander speedwell, I describe it as punk. The hairs stick out on two sides, on either side, but if you turn the stalk round, you're looking this way and you can't see the hairs at all. So that's something to try in the summer if you've not ever noticed it. Foxgloves, they are common in the clearings on clay with flints. Foxgloves actually prefer acidic soils, so you definitely won't see those on the chalk. The ground cover actually on clay with flints is mainly bramble, very prickly, difficult to walk through, not very pleasant. But if you're walking through a Chiltern wood and suddenly you see a carpet of dog's mercury instead of brambles, then that tells you instantly that you are now on the chalk, because dog's mercury is a calcicole. It's one of the plants that grows on chalk. So it's interesting as well because it's a dioecious plant. In other words, it has separate male and female plants. And you've got a male there on the left and a female on the right. So on the male plant, you can see the flowers have got little stamens sticking out. In the right-hand one, the flowers are slightly fewer, they're held on shorter stalks, but you can see on the flower there, it's got ovaries, which are hairy, and then it's got two little stars and sigmas sort of sticking up like horns on top. So that's a female flower. And surprisingly, this is a wind-pollinated plant, which you wouldn't expect to find in the middle of a wood, but it flowers very, very early, begins in February, March is its flowering time. So as it grows in deciduous woods, of course, it's flowering well before the canopy comes out on the trees, and there's obviously enough wind down at that level to pollinate the flowers, because really, dog's mercury pretty well dominates the ground in calcareous woods. Right, so we've now stepped onto the chalk. So this one, sweet woodruff, is a calcicole, chalk indicator, very attractive little flowers. I think the whirl of leaves makes me think of an Elizabethan ruff that they used to wear around their dresses, you know. Sweet woodruff, but the flowers don't actually have a scent. But what does smell nice is the dried plants. And so people used to make bunches of this, dry the plants and make bunches and hang them in the wardrobe, put them between the linen, put them in potpourri, and so on, in the days when houses were frankly quite smelly. Another calcicole, thanicle, rather attractive rosette of leaves, bright green, and the flower stalks about 12, maybe 18 inches tall, 12 inches probably. Little white pom-poms of flowers. But if I say this is in the cow parsley or the carrot family, you'll say, well, no, surely not, because their inflorescences are umbels. I always think umbrella. In other words, you have the umbrella shape of the inflorescence with a little tiny flower on the end of each stalk. This is the little pom-poms. But what's happened here is that the spokes of the umbrella, if you like, have been contracted. And so the flowers have all been drawn in together to make the little pom-poms. And you can see, if you look carefully, each pom-pom is a cluster of little white flowers. So that's a nice one to find. And this is a rare one. You'll find it in some of the best Chiltern woods. It's garden worthy, it is grown in gardens, but it's a perfectly good wild plant. Tall plants, lovely large bells, slightly hairy inside, which is a bit strange, I think, but very attractive. And then this one is really rare. Herb Paris. If you see this, and if it's in a site where it hasn't been recorded before, you should be straight in contact with your county recorder, because it is rare and it is declining. So it's a very strange plant. It has just 4 leaves around the stem and a very peculiar flower sticking out at the top, just one. And the fairly wide sort of spear-shaped things, they are actually the sepals, not the petals. And the needle-shaped things just above, 4 of them, are the petals. And then you've got 8 stamens and a big ovary above in the middle. And the fruit is described as berry-like. So technically not a berry, but a fleshy fruit. So that is a rare one in calcareous woods. So now what I've done here is put in a few of the general indicator plants, but then I've left in most of my orchid pictures because I think generally people like orchids and they're rare. So the early purple is the first one to be flowering in May, and this picture shows you the difference in colour between different flowers in the same patch. But the other thing to look at is down in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a leaf, and you can see it's spotted. It's got blotches, really, and they tend to be longitudinal, going along parallel with the veins. Well, keep that in your head, because later on you're going to see the leaves of a common spotted orchid. And if you see an orchid plant, just the rosette, not in flower, and it's got spots on, you might think, well, is this an early purple or is it a common spotted? And you'll see the spots on the common spotted are quite different, and you'll see them later. So that's those anyway are the kind of spots on an early purple. White helleborine. Now, if you live in the north, you may not know this at all, but it's actually one of the commoner orchids in the Chilterns. It's a helleborine, and they don't have spurs. And the white helleborine never opens its flowers to normal width, so it looks more like a lily. Not huge, 12 inches, maybe 18 inches for a really big one. But you find them underneath big old beech trees, and that's the place to look, which is really weird because under a beech tree, the soil is usually pretty bare, almost completely bare, because beech roots are very shallow, they take all the water. So, you know, how can these orchids be growing there? Well, I think they've got an invisible friend. I haven't looked up the literature, I have to say, I haven't done a research on this, but you probably know that forest trees rely on the mycorrhizae, that is the fungi that are in the soil, which actually absorb minerals better than trees do and pass the minerals to the tree, and they gain sugar from the tree. Now, you probably know also that orchid seeds need fungi in order to germinate. They have no food store of their own. So I think, you know, the only way we can explain this extraordinary location of these plants is that they're using the same fungus. But if anyone knows differently, they'd better tell me at the end. Another quite common helleborine in the Chilterns, but again, it's a southern plant. You won't see it in the north. This is the violet helleborine. And this shows you the helleborine flower shape very nicely. 3 sepals at the back, 2 top petals at the front, which are pale green in this plant, and the bottom front petal is the lip of the orchid, and there's no spur. So this orchid is surprising because it doesn't start flowering till August, which is very late for an orchid. Most of them are June and July. So August to September, you can find these, and they're big. They're, you know, the spikes 2 feet tall, and as I say, relatively common in the Chilterns. Here we are in an ancient, wonderful beechwood, an old, very old pollarded beech tree with bamboo cane, which is obviously marking the position of something, and it's that. And that's a narrow-lipped helleborine. The same kind of shape as the last one, but the lip is narrower, fair enough. But this is a rare orchid, and hence the bamboo cane. So I'm going to show you its distribution map in a minute, so keep that in your head. It's not the prettiest orchid, is it? It's a rather plain Jane of an orchid, I think, but it is rare. Right, fly orchid. Chilterns is a fairly good site for them, but they are declining. Now, can you see it? This is a typical habitat. It's a hazel hedge, and this orchid grows all amongst the, you know, the hedgerow stuff. They are really difficult to spot, but I can help you. Now you can probably see it. It's halfway in the middle of the frame on the left. And if we go closer, it is, of course, one of the insect lookalikes. So the 2 top petals have turned into the antennae, sort of the insect, and the lip makes the body of the insect. So what is more important, though, is the smell, because this orchid mimics the pheromone of the female wasp, as it is. It is not a fly, it's not attracting flies, it's attracting 2 different species, actually, of digger wasp. And they're not the big yellow stripy jobs, they are smaller black-bodied wasps. So the male wasp is attracted to this, will attempt to mate with it, will finish up looking stupid because the pollinia of the orchid are at the top of the flower in what looks like a busby hat. You can see slightly yellow markings there. And those pollinia detach themselves from the flower and glue themselves onto the back of the insect. So it flies away, not having achieved its object and having orchid pollinia all stuck to it. And the only way to get rid of the pollen is to visit another flower, which it does and probably picks up some more in the process. So that is the fly orchid. And there's distribution maps for the narrow-lipped helleborine on the left and the fly orchid on the right. This is not the latest from the latest atlas, it's the 10-year previous one, but the distribution hasn't changed, it looks similar. So the pale blue dots are where the orchid used to be found and is no longer. The deep blue, dark blue dots, navy blue, are where it still is. And you can see there's rather a worrying number of pale ones in the Chilterns for the fly orchid. It is, you know, some of these orchids are in trouble. This, I think, is my favourite orchid of all, actually, the greater butterfly orchid. It has just 2 leaves at the bottom, and the flowers are really quite large. This spike would be about 2 feet tall. The flowers have got long lip, beautiful white, pale green, and a very long spur. There it is, about 1 inch long. So these are big flowers, and they have a vanilla scent. And looking at this and taking everything into account, these are pollinated by night-flying moths. So that explains the white colour, the scent, and the very long spur with plenty of nectar in it. Military orchid. This is the iconic orchid in the Chilterns. It was very common, and then it was so collected and pressed by very keen botanists in the days when botany was a very, very popular hobby. Things have changed, sadly. But in the 1920s, it was believed to be completely extinct in Britain. It was rediscovered in 1947, happily, and it's now been found in another 2 native sites, and it's also been propagated and re-established in other places. But I don't know, it's a military orchid because those are soldiers. Now then, you see the soldier's helmet on the top. You can see his 2 little arms and his 2 little legs in purple. And then, of course, because he's a soldier, he has a uniform with buttons down the front. So there they are, the little soldiers on a stalk. Right. So we're going to come out of the wood now and have a look at the grasslands. And we're beginning right on top of the plateau. This is towards the south of the hills, actually. And the M40 is down at the back of that slope. You can't see, it's hidden down there. So you're on top of the plateau, and in the background on the left is a wonderful expanse of chalk grassland. But what you're looking at is a gorse bush. Now, of course, gorse grows on heaths, generally on acidic soil. So what is it doing up there, with chalk grassland just behind? Well, of course, it's on the plateau, so there's some clay with flints in the soil up there. As I say, it's very confused. It's a real mishmash in the Chilterns. And this is what gives, or partly what gives the great diversity of plants. You've got all of the wonderful chalk flowers, and you've got the ones that grow on the more acidic soils as well. And it's not all highly drained. The soils at the top are quite moist. So you've got a huge range of soil types and a huge range of flowers to match. Anyway, if we now go on to some chalk grassland, this is short grazed chalk grassland. Not in that site, in a different one, actually, this picture. There's a lump of chalk in front, and the hairy violet, which is a calcicole. And it flowers very early, March to May, probably. I love that plant because you don't expect to see beautiful violet-coloured violets in the middle of grassland in March, and they're beautiful, beautiful flowers. very much like dog violets in their general shape and in other ways. We're up on top of the plateau again now, very near actually to the last but one slide, up on top of Watlington Hill with the M40 down at the bottom of that slope, hidden from here. And you've got cowslips. Cowslips, of course, are calcicoles, although they do grow on certainly neutral, probably slightly acid soils as well. But notice behind those cowslips, there's scrub, isn't there? I think those were hawthorn bushes growing. And this is a huge problem. Everywhere where you've got plants that grow in short grazed grassland, it's turning into scrub. And the trouble is, sheep grazing is no longer commercially viable. It is a real problem. You know, the teams of volunteers in this kind of area, they do scrub bashing. And that's what they do, scrub bashing, scrub bashing, scrub bashing, because the scrub regrows. And really, we need a lot more sheep. But, you know, that is not simple, is it? Anyway, going a bit further down the hill, there's another large area of yellow flowers. They are not cowslips. That is actually horseshoe vetch. And a lot of people confuse it with bird's foot trefoil, but actually the flowers are paler yellow. They're in a beautiful neat circle, which bird's foot trefoil doesn't do. But the main difference is the pods. You can see that picture on the right. I think it ought to be called wavy vetch. But in fact, when the seeds are ripe, the pod breaks up into single-seeded segments, each of which is horseshoe-shaped. And what I think is amazing is the fact that that is the common name of that plant. That name was given by people a long time ago who knew that that species behaves in that way. Now, this is a small plant that grows in short grassland. To even see those pods, you have to get down on your hands and knees and really, you know, investigate. And yet people knew it well enough that they called it the horseshoe vetch. I think that's incredible. And we've lost a lot. And also, this is really important because it's the food plant for the chalk-hill blue butterfly. So one of our rarer chalk-hill butterflies. Typical flora. Imagine standing on that on a hot summer day. You've got wild thyme there. Imagine the scent of that, and rock rose. It's lovely. And rock rose is a beautiful plant. It's really garden worthy, lovely to have in the rockery. But it's also important because that is the food plant for the brown Argus butterfly, sitting on parsnip there, which is another calcicole. But brown Argus is one of the rarer butterflies of calcareous soil. But it lays its eggs on rock rose. I think salad burnet is the best indicator that we're on chalky soil or calcareous soil, beyond limestone as well. Because the flowers are inconspicuous actually, but it's the leaves. It's a very common plant, and the leaves form nice rosettes, and they actually have a slightly turquoise colour, which this slide doesn't really show. I mean, there's the leaf there. It's in the rose family. The leaf is actually quite rose-shaped. It's a compound leaf with leaflets, neatly toothed, and there are so many of these leaves in chalk grassland that you can't miss it. It's all over the place. Its flowers, though, are strange. They don't look at all like rose family. You've got a head of flowers. That's not just one flower. And probably on that head about 24 female flowers at the top. Each of those clusters of pink, sort of whatever, it's the stars and stigmas of the female flowers. And the male flowers are down the bottom, and they have stamens on long filaments which blow in the wind, because this plant is wind pollinated and it has no petals because they would just get in the way. Marjoram, same thing as oregano, which is what it's called if you buy it in the supermarket. Wonderful smell. You don't need flowers to identify it. Just pick one leaf, squash it a bit and sniff, and it's very, very distinctive. Lovely smell. Lovely in the spaghetti bolognese, actually. But butterflies love it as well, of course. And the stemless thistle, very, very common. Keeps its leaves flat on the grass. Very prickly leaves, as you can see. It keeps its flowers in the middle of the leaves, which really protects them from something like a sheep or, would get its nose prickled. But if you are going to have a picnic on short chalk grassland, be very careful where you sit. That's all. Now, the Chiltern gentian, have to include this one, and you may be disappointed because it's a gentian, but it's not gentian blue. But it's not a gentiana, it's a gentianella, and they have the pinky colour. But the Chiltern gentian, is, well, a good 12 inches tall, quite a nice height. It's got crinkly outsides to the petals, and the flower shape, though, is just like any other gentian with the sort of fringe inside. The map, though, distribution map, shows you why we call it the Chiltern gentian, but its proper Latin name is Gentianella germanica, and that tells you something. It's much more common on the continent. Now we come to the grassland orchids, and starting with the common spotted orchid, which actually is, I think, our commonest orchid in Britain. So look at the spotted leaf at the bottom of that whole plant, and you can see the spots. They're quite neat, they're not blotchy really, and they tend to be horizontal on the leaf. So you can distinguish between that and the very blotchy effort, which was the early purple orchid. The flowers, they have the lip has 3 lobes, and the lobes are more or less equal in length, although the middle one is pointed a bit like a beak. And the lip is very vividly marked in hoops, spots, blotches, and those markings vary slightly between plants. They're not constant. Now you look at that and you can say, well, this is a bee-pollinated plant. It's attracting bees because bees love honey guides, and those circles and spots and so on act as wonderful honey guides for a bee, and there's a landing platform there as well, isn't there? So that is a bee-pollinated orchid. There's the distribution map. Now, look at that and you say, well, hang on, where's London? Where's Manchester? That's, I can't believe that. It's not that common. No, of course it isn't. But each spot represents a 10-kilometre square. And if there's so much as one plant within that 10-kilometre square, you've got a spot on the map. And the thing about the common spotted is that it will grow on brownfield sites. It likes mineral-rich conditions. It doesn't have to be an open grassland. And orchid seeds are so minute, they will blow for miles and miles, hundreds of miles. And so it can establish itself in all sorts of unexpected places. So there's at least one plant in every 10-kilometre square, almost throughout the whole of the British Isles, really, apart from places like the Wash. And don't ask me about Cornwall, I don't know the answer to that. The southern marsh orchid, closely related to the common spotted, very similar, but the shape of the lip is different. It's more rounded. It doesn't have the 3 very obvious lobes, but a little sort of beak in the middle. And they do hybridize. And this picture is the side of an old chalk pit in Hemel Hempstead, actually. And there's a mixture here of southern marsh and common spotted. And incidentally, marsh orchids do not only grow on marsh soil. They can grow in quite dry places like this. You can see the white ones towards the left. You can see 3 very clear lobes. So they are probably pure common spotted. The one closest may be a pure southern marsh, or it may be a hybrid. But if you see hybrid populations of orchids, and they are very promiscuous, look at the largest, most vigorous looking plants, because they are very often the hybrid ones. Hybrid vigor is a definite feature of orchids. They like being hybrids. Fragrant orchid is a looser spike, so you can see the spurs, which are very long, sticking into the middle. Similar shaped flower, but no markings, no dots or spots and that sort of thing. So you can say, no, this is not attracting bees. And it's the chalk fragrant orchid. These flowers smell absolutely gorgeous. I mean, you have to get down pretty low to smell them, but they are lovely. So they are attracting moths as opposed to bees. A nice scent, no honey guides, and that probably, and long spurs, plenty of nectar. And the same argument goes for the pyramidal orchid, which actually is increasing in numbers these days because it's good at colonizing fairly recently disturbed sites. So you often see it on the roadside, and the bright pink flowers are noticeable even if you drive past, as long as you're not exceeding 30 probably, because they're so bright. You can't say the same for this. Quayblade. It's one of the commoner orchids. It's just got 2 leaves at the bottom. And if you just saw 2 leaves and it wasn't flowering, you'd think, could it be a greater butterfly orchid? But no, it's almost certainly going to be a twayblade because that's much more common. Very difficult to spot because it's grass green. It's the same height as the grass and it's got very small green flowers. You can see on the right, they've got a long droopy sort of lip and then short green petals and sepals up the top. Something else that you'd be hard pressed to see, that I was shown, taken to where it was. The pencil is pointing to it and you can hardly see it. The other things are actually flowers of the salad burnet. That's a frog orchid, tiny little thing. And if you can see the right-hand corner, there's an ordinary daisy as a scale object. It's actually hidden on my screen by some faces. Now, getting to the end, right down at the bottom of the Chilterns, looking over the Thames, and you can see how high I've climbed up. I would not want to go up there again. Actually, I'm older than I was when I took that picture. So we're a long way up. It's not rocky or anything, but it's a steep slope. But it's a pilgrimage for botanists, because up there is a colony of monkey orchids, and that is a very rare orchid. And you can see the monkey's got a head. He's got skinny arms sticking out, skinny legs, and between the legs you can see he's got a little tail because he's a monkey. So that is a very rare orchid. And there is the distribution map. And the only change now is there's a few more red dots because it's been introduced in a few more places in Kent, I think. But there are just 2 sites where the native orchid, the wild orchid, is still present. And of course, the one on the left is the one we just saw. And if you go to it's the Hartslock Reserve, they will have a warden on duty when the orchids are flowering and a little path marked out, and you can go and see them. However, I left one orchid right to the end because I think that's not a very good side to finish on, is it? It's a bit of an anticlimax. It's this, bee orchid. If you're out with a group, there's a certain point when you hear someone say, "Ooh!" and then everyone rushes over because they've found a bee orchid. Because I think these plants tend to flower only once, so they never turn up in exactly the same place 2 years running. So they're always a surprise. And I look at those and I see a laughing clown. I don't know if you can see it. It's got a big chin, wide open mouth, ho, 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 and a funny green hat on top. So why is the bee orchid laughing? He's laughing at us, or she, or it, because we call it a bee orchid because we think it's pollinated by bees that are attracted to its appearance. Actually, it's not. It doesn't need bees. bee orchids are mainly self-pollinated. Now, there is one. The pollinia are located in the top of what I call the green hat. I think you can see them in the pictures on the left. There's a sort of yellow bulge up at the top there. They are released from those positions on thin threads which dangle in the wind, and the breeze carries them in towards the flower to the receptive surfaces, the equivalent of the stigma, which is just inside. And so they pollinate themselves. And I mean, that's my picture, so, I've seen it. It's not just in books. And yes, DNA analysis has been done, and it proves that more than 90%, I think it's true, of bee orchids have been self-pollinated. In other words, they have only one parent. So, flowers are not simple. Flowers can do things that animals certainly can't do. And I think that's a nice point to stop. So, oh, there we are, pointing to the linear hanging down. Right, thank you.